Welcome to EconWorks. We live in an era of massive platforms, global supply chains, and unprecedented market concentration. But behind every headline about a merger or a legal settlement, there is a deeper mechanical struggle for control. On this show, we pull back the curtain on the invisible forces shaping our economy. We look past the talking points to examine where law, power, and markets actually collide, and how those collisions redefine the world we live in. Coming to you from the EconWorks desk, we're diving into a breakdown of the systems that run our modern life. This is EconWorks. Today's episode, Broadcasters versus Monopolies, the antitrust battle over your TV.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today we're getting into something that happened in mid-March of 2026. The federal government officially blessed this massive, $6.2 billion television merger between two broadcasting giants.
Right. They basically looked at the deal, checked all the standard antitrust boxes, and, essentially told the companies they were cleared for takeoff.
Exactly. But then, less than 24 hours later, this coalition of states dragged that exact same deal into a courtroom and just slammed the brakes so hard you could practically smell the burning rubber.
It was incredibly fast. And we have a really revealing stack of source material today that help us figure out why. It's all centered on an economic breakdown from EconWorks that details this exact corporate marriage, the Nexstar-Tenya merger.
Yeah, and our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how a single media merger sparked this, unprecedented regulatory civil war.
Right.
We're going to look at how this one specific battle is completely redefining what the word antitrust actually means for you, the consumer. And more importantly, what it means for the very real numbers on your monthly internet and cable bill.
Because, let's be honest, that bill is historically just a total black box.
Oh, absolutely.
You open it up, you see a broadcast TV fee or some regional sports fee, and the number is, $5 higher than last month.
And you have zero visibility into why. You just know you're paying more for the exact same channels you already had.
Right, exactly. And that opaque wall of fees is exactly where this $6.2 billion collision is actually happening.
Okay, so let's set the scene with the timeline here, because the sheer speed of this whiplash is just stunning. In December 2025, the Nexstar-Tenya deal is announced.
Yeah.
And we were talking about massive consolidation in the local television broadcasting space, right? Yep. Combining hundreds of local stations all across the country.
A huge...
Yeah. So fast forward to mid-March, the Department of Justice and the Federal Communications Commission officially give it the green light.
They did, yeah. They required a few targeted station divestitures, selling off a station here or there, just to prevent an outright monopoly in a couple of specific local cities. But broadly, the feds just said yes.
Which is universally considered the finish line. The federal regulators sign off, the bankers pop the champagne, and the companies begin the actual integration process.
Right, they think it's over.
But then, less than a day later, this really powerful coalition of state attorneys general files a massive lawsuit to block the transaction.
Mm.
And they successfully secure a temporary restraining order from a judge.
Yeah, they just freeze a federally approved merger right in its tracks.
Which is wild. If the federal government, this massive apparatus at the DOJ and FCC, spent months looking at the underlying economics and decided this merger was perfectly fine, what did the states see that made them immediately detonate the deal?
Well, to understand that sudden blockade, we have to look at how completely opposite their regulatory philosophies are right now.
Okay, let's unpack this.
So the federal regulators are looking at the macro, modern media landscape. They approved the deal because they view massive scale as an absolute necessity for traditional broadcasters to simply survive.
Right.
Nexstar and Tenya own local TV stations. In the federal view, those stations aren't just competing with the other local channels in their broadcast area anymore. They're fighting this defensive existential war against digital behemoths like Google and Meta.
And streaming giants like Netflix and Amazon.
Exactly.
Wait, I have to challenge that premise, though. Is a local ABC affiliate really competing with Netflix? If I want to watch the local weather or, high school football highlights or the local evening news, I'm not opening up the Netflix app.
No, of course not.
I'm going to my local channel. So is that federal defense actually structurally sound? Or is it just sort of the convenient excuse for two massive companies to merge and crush their local competition?
Well, it's a fair question, but here's the thing. You aren't going to Netflix for the local weather. But you are also not the real customer in this dynamic.
Wait, really? Who is?
the advertiser is.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the federal regulators are looking at the absolute lifeblood of the broadcasting industry, which is advertising dollars. 20 years ago, if a local car dealership wanted to reach people in their specific town, they had to buy ad time on the local broadcast station.
Right, there was no other way.
Exactly. But today, that same dealership can just give their money to Google or Meta to hyper-target people in a, 5-mile radius who have recently searched for new sedans.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
The digital giants have completely hollowed out the local advertising revenue model. So the federal perspective is that these broadcasters just must consolidate. They have to pool their resources and build massive national scale just to have enough leverage to stay alive in an advertising market that's now entirely dominated by tech algorithms.
Okay, so the feds are playing this macro game of corporate survival. It's basically let them get big or let them die.
Precisely.
Right.
But the state attorneys general are looking at something entirely different. Their mandate is intensely localized.
Right.
They do not care about the broadcasters' macro advertising war with Silicon Valley. They care about the fact that combining Nexstar and Tegna creates an entity with unparalleled leverage over television distributors.
You mean like the cable and satellite companies?
Exactly. And the states believe that leverage is going to be weaponized to extract higher fees, which will, inevitably be passed down to the monthly bills of their residents.
So for a long time, antitrust law in the U.S. had this one main rule of thumb, right? Like, does this merger raise prices for the consumer? If no, it's probably fine.
Yes, the classic consumer welfare
Right,
standard.
the consumer welfare standard. But it feels like this Nexstar-Tegna case is exposing a massive fracture in how we actually apply that standard today.
Oh, absolutely.
The federal government is focusing on the structure of the market, trying to make sure traditional media can survive against tech monopolies. But the states are ignoring all that structural theory and focusing purely on the retail price paid by the household.
And that fracture is really the defining feature of modern antitrust. And to figure out which side is actually correct, to figure out if you, the listener, are going to end up footing the bill for this $6.2 billion deal, we have to tear open the plumbing of the television market.
Right, we need to follow the money through the supply chain.
Exactly, because the way a broadcast actually reaches your living room is surprisingly convoluted.
Yeah, let's map out those market mechanics.
Right.
So in this supply chain, you start with the broadcasters, right?
Right.
That's Nexstar and Tegna. They own the local affiliates, and they hold the legal rights to the programming that airs on them. Next, you have the distributors. These are your cable companies, your satellite providers, or even live TV streaming services like YouTube TV. And their job is to take all those individual broadcast channels, bundle them together into a package, and then sell that package to the household.
And the crucial mechanism here is that distributors don't just, pull those broadcast signals out of the air for free.
No, definitely not.
They are legally required to negotiate and pay what are known as retransmission consent fees. These are ongoing, heavily negotiated payments made by the cable companies to the broadcasters for the right to carry those channels.
And when those contracts expire, the negotiations are just brutal, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely.
Those are the blackouts, right? Like when you turn on your TV on a Sunday morning, and instead of a football game, there's just a black screen with text saying, call your cable provider and tell them to bring back your favorite channel.
Exactly. That is the broadcaster pulling their signal to inflict maximum pain on the distributor during a fee negotiation.
So thinking about this structurally, it's basically like a wholesale flour supplier hiking prices on a local bakery.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. The flour supplier is the broadcaster. And they suddenly merge with another massive supplier, which gives them a ton of market power.
Yeah.
Then they go to the local bakery, which is the cable company, and say, hey, we are doubling the price of flour. Now, the bakery has a horrible choice to make. Do they charge their customers $6 for a loaf of bread and risk them walking away entirely? Or do they keep the price at $4, eat the increased cost of the flour, and just accept much tighter profit margins?
That tension right there is exactly what economists in our EconWorks source material call the pass-through problem. It is the central economic puzzle of this entire lawsuit.
A pass-through problem, okay.
Yeah. When those upstream costs increase, when the retransmission fees inevitably go up because a combined Nexstar-Tegna has way more leverage to threaten blackouts, how much of that cost actually passes through to the downstream consumer?
Right. Does the price of the bread go up?
Exactly. And the state's theory is incredibly linear. They are arguing that you, the consumer, are definitely going to pay more for the bread.
Because the combined firm controls too many critical local stations.
Right. They demand higher retransmission fees. Those wholesale costs raise the operating expenses for the cable companies. And as we know, cable companies are not charities.
No, they certainly aren't.
To maintain their profit margins, they pass those increased costs straight onto the household.
Okay, but what is the broadcaster's defense against that? I mean, that linear logic seems pretty airtight.
Well, their defense relies entirely on the fact that consumer behavior has completely fractured over the last decade. They point to something called the cord-cutting constraint.
The cord-cutting constraint.
Yeah, they are telling the judge that the cable companies simply cannot pass those costs along anymore because consumers are uniquely sensitive to traditional TV price hikes right now.
Oh, I see.
If a traditional distributor raises the monthly bill by even a few dollars to cover those new retransmission fees, it triggers just a massive wave of cancellations.
Because the consumer finally has a viable escape route.
Exactly.
I mean, 10 years ago, if your cable company raised your bill by $10, what were you going to do? Read a book. You just had to pay it.
Right. You were trapped.
But now, with streaming alternatives like Hulu, Disney Plus, and Netflix basically everywhere, people just cut the cord. The cable companies probably know exactly how many cancellations a $5 price hike will trigger.
They do. And the math on that consumer pain threshold is just ruthless. If the cable companies raise retail prices, they lose subscribers so fast that it actually destroys their revenue faster than absorbing the wholesale cost would.
Wow.
Therefore, the broadcasters argue the distributors' margins will shrink, but the cost will never reach the consumer. The retail price stays flat.
That is fascinating.
Yeah. Our source material summarizes this with a really fantastic insight. It says the case does not turn on whether prices increase, but on whether they can.
Hold on, though. If the distributors can't raise prices and they are forced to just infinitely absorb these rising retransmission fees, won't they just go out of business? Like, their margins will eventually shrink to zero.
And that is the existential threat hanging over the distributors right now. And it actually highlights a massive philosophical question about why the state attorneys general are even involved in the first place.
Right, because why are they fighting this battle?
The states are effectively stepping in to protect the profit margins of the cable companies under the assumption that if the cable companies fail, the consumer eventually suffers.
But wait, if the core economic question, whether the consumer will actually pay more, is based on this highly debatable pass-through problem, and even the top economists can't agree on whether the cord-cutting constraint will hold, why launch this aggressive lawsuit now?
It's a great question.
I mean, why go to war and secure a temporary restraining order over an economic theory that essentially requires a crystal ball to prove?
Because modern antitrust strategy is rarely about waiting for a final verdict from a judge.
Oh, really?
Think about the massive headline-grabbing antitrust cases, like the U.S. government suing Google or the FTC going after Microsoft.
Sure.
Those cases are usually built around exclusionary conduct, accusing a company of actively sabotaging competitors or illegally tying products together to kill competition. The Nexstar-Tegna dispute is much more subtle.
How so?
Well, Nexstar and Tegna don't actually compete against each other in most local markets. Combining an NBC affiliate in one state with a CBS affiliate in another state doesn't reduce the number of channels a viewer has.
Oh, I get it. So it's not about preventing a monopoly in a specific town.
No.
It's purely about bargaining leverage. It's regulators stepping in and asking, does giving a company more leverage to demand higher wholesale fees actually harm the economy, or does it just redistribute billions of dollars between two massive corporations?
Exactly. Are we just watching billionaires fight over the profit margins of a shrinking industry? And because that is such a murky legal area, securing a permanent victory in court to, permanently block the merger is a massive uphill battle. Federal judges are notoriously reluctant to step in and completely unwind a transaction after the expert federal agencies have already scrutinized and approved it.
Yeah, I'd imagine they hate trying to unscramble the egg once the companies have started combining assets.
They really do.
Which means the states aren't necessarily trying to win a multi-year trial.
Yeah.
The lawsuit itself is the weapon.
Yes. By securing that temporary restraining order, the states introduced a massive injection of uncertainty and they stopped the integration cold. And in corporate mergers, time is quite literally money.
I can only imagine.
Every single day a deal is delayed, these companies are bleeding cash. They're paying armies of lawyers. They're paying astronomical interest rates on the billions of dollars of financing they locked in just to buy the company.
Oh, man.
Their stock prices start oscillating based on rumor instead of fundamentals. The sheer cost of waiting just becomes agonizing.
And that financial agony is the whole point, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. The delay radically alters the risk calculus for the executives.
Right.
The state attorneys general might not have the legal precedent to block the merger forever based purely on the pass-through theory. But by dragging the companies into a prolonged expense of limbo, they force Nexstar back to the negotiating table.
So modern antitrust enforcement at the state level relies heavily on this strategy of attrition.
Exactly. They use the threat of a dragged-out court battle to extract legally binding concessions that the federal government didn't even ask for.
Like forcing Nexstar to legally agree to a hard cap on retransmission fees for the next 5 years.
Yes.
Or forcing them to spin off even more local stations to independent buyers before they're allowed to close the deal.
That is the ultimate goal here. The states use the temporary restraining order not as a permanent wall, but as a toll booth.
A toll booth, that's a great way to put it.
They make the pain of delay so severe that the merging companies willingly give up leverage just to get the deal done.
So taking a step back, what does this regulatory civil war mean for you, the listener? We've traced these massive macro theories of antitrust down into the messy plumbing of retransmission fees, the math of cord cutting, and then back out to the high-stakes tactical delays used by the states.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. And the reality is, the outcome of this specific Nexstar Tevia battle might never show up as a distinct, legible line item on your TV bill. If the cable companies are forced to absorb the cost, the impact might be entirely invisible to you.
True.
But the EconWorks analysis leaves us with a profound, unresolved question that is probably going to define the next decade of antitrust law.
Yeah, and that question is, if a massive merger allows one corporation to squeeze $1 billion out of another corporation's profit margins, but the retail price for the everyday consumer doesn't change by a single penny, has competition actually been harmed?
Right. It forces us to ask what the actual purpose of regulatory intervention is.
Exactly. Are the state attorneys general acting as an essential shield to protect the public from theoretical future price hikes? Or are they simply putting their thumb on the scale in a private dispute, deciding which massive industry, the broadcasters or the distributors, deserves to win a battle over wholesale pricing?
It's a really unsettling thought, honestly, that the government might just be refereeing profit margins rather than protecting competition.
It really is.
But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. The broadcaster's entire defense against raising your cable bill relies on that cord-cutting constraint we talked about.
Right. The idea that you'll just cancel if the price goes up.
Exactly. They argue that the sheer availability of cheap streaming alternatives forms an invisible ceiling that prevents traditional TV prices from skyrocketing. But look closely at the streaming market right now.
It's changing fast.
The era of cheap, heavily subsidized streaming is basically over. Netflix, Disney, Warner Bros., they are rapidly consolidating. They are creating their own massive bundles, and they are aggressively hiking their own monthly subscription prices.
That's very true.
So, if cheap streaming is the only invisible ceiling keeping traditional media from passing their massive wholesale costs down to you, what happens to this entire economic ecosystem when that ceiling vanishes? When the streaming platforms finish consolidating their own power and their prices become just as expensive as the old cable bundle, where do you run then?
Well, when the escape route gets too expensive to use, the cord-cutting constraint disappears entirely, and then, all those upstream costs have nowhere to go but straight to the consumer.
The pass-through problem suddenly isn't just a theory anymore.
Exactly.
So the next time you open up that monthly bill and stare at that black box of opaque fees, keep an eye on the numbers. Because if that invisible ceiling cracks, the regulatory civil war we just explored might be the only thing standing between you and a drastically more expensive reality.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of EconWorks. The goal of this series is to move beyond the surface-level descriptions of how markets work and start looking at the actual architecture of competition. We'll be back soon with another look at where the law and economics meet the market. For the full technical analysis and more from this series, visit us at econworks.com. If you found today's breakdown valuable, please subscribe and share the show. It helps us keep the analysis independent. From all of us here at EconWorks, thanks for listening.